Yeah. So, yeah, that's a very, very good idea. So what I had in mind was camping in the desert or in Florida in the winter when it's kind of cold. And I noticed a lot of the questions were coming in as I'm going to be in the deep snow. That's fine. I'm glad to talk to you about that too. Really severe winter or the mild winters of Florida or Arizona or the desert Southwest. First thing, let me just make sure you all understand that if it's all possible, be a snowbird and drive south to where it's warmer or drive lower in elevation to where it's warmer. That's my first advice to everyone. Just to give you an idea, though, I lived in Anchorage, Alaska for 6 years in my box fan. So every winter that I lived in it, which was 6 years, it got down to 30 below. There was never an exception. We'd get a cold snap would roll through and it'd be cold. It'd be 30 below for 1, 2, 3 weeks at a time, and then it would break. So I know all about camping in extremely severe cold. So we'll talk about that if that's what you're interested in. Okay, so Stan, why don't you read me the first question while I reboot my iPad?
Sure. Wanderer 1 says, I live in a casita and would love to winter camp. I worry my tanks will freeze. Any way to keep them from freezing?
So I'll repeat the question. Wanderer 1?
Correct.
Wanderer 1 asks, he or she wants to camp in their casita in extreme cold. And how will they keep their pipes from freezing? And that's probably going to be the biggest question we get. It all depends on the cold. Of course, I mean, if it's below freezing and stays consistently below freezing, I mean, even if it's just 30, eventually your pipes will freeze. I gave up. Like I said, I lived in 6 years in my van in Anchorage, Alaska. And of course, my van didn't have hookups. But then after that 6 years, my youngest son wanted to come and live with me. So I bought a little travel trailer, 24-foot travel trailer, and moved it into a year-round park in Anchorage, Alaska. And we lived in it. He and I lived in it. He couldn't live in the van with me. He had to go to school. And so we got an address and we put him in the new school at that address at the RV park. And I gave up. I could, now again, I'm talking extreme cold. Routinely, it would be 30 below, and zero was, well, it wasn't routinely 30 below. 2-3 times a year, we'd get a cold snap, and it would go down to 30 below. But zero was routine. I mean, once a month, it would hit zero. Every night was below freezing. The average, Anchorage isn't a very cold, really, for Alaska, it's not all that cold. I got to make these answers shorter. Stop, Bob. It wasn't really all that cold. But I could not keep my pipes from freezing. I just stopped. I gave up. We were in an RV park. We used the bathhouse. My son and I just went into the bathhouse, and we used a pea pot, like we do in the van, except we would use it when we had to, and we would take that into the bathhouse and dump it. You were carrying in a backpack with all your stuff. You just used a pea pot with a good lid, and you put it in there, and you took it in and you dumped it. And that's how we did all our cleaning, because I couldn't keep the pipes from freezing. Most of you will not be in that severe cold, but if you're in northern, there are a lot of places in the lower 48 where it will be that cold. I don't have an answer. I'll tell you what I did try, because I've lived in Alaska all my life. I know all about keeping pipes from freezing. The first thing you'll do is you'll wrap, if you have a source of electricity, and if you're not moving, if you're moving around, I don't see how it's going to happen. If you have a source of electricity, you wrap heat tape on it first, and that wraps around it. It has an electric element that goes through it. You plug it in, and it provides a heat source. And you have to have a heat source. And then you wrap, you buy special insulation. Usually it's fiberglass, but it could be other things. It has to be flexible, of course. You got to wrap it around the pipe. And then on the outside of you wrap around the fiberglass insulation, the pipe wrap. And then you skirt the trailer. And I did all these things. But you can't compete with 30 below. I just gave up and didn't. But, and so those are the steps you'll take to keep your pipes from freezing. You got a pipe going into the ground. You got a pipe going into the toilet, I'm assuming. And you'll insulate, you'll put up skirting and insulate that. They all froze on me. And what I found was the only real hope I had, because I was in an RV park, I had electricity. I got heat lamps. I got 500-watt heat lamps and put them underneath. They just ran 24 hours a day, and I paid the electricity. And they would aim at the pipes, not too close, so they would burn them. Although that's pretty tough plastic. But I had heat lamps down there that would aim, and it couldn't catch anything fire. That was the main thing. And that worked pretty darn well. But they still froze, and I got tired of paying all that money for electricity. Okay, I got to stop. That's the extreme. Most of you aren't going to be doing like that. You have a camper, you're a casita. You're not going to be in an RV park. I just wouldn't try. That's my honest answer to you. I just wouldn't try. If you're in that kind of cold. If every so often it goes below zero, then you could wrap them. Although a lot of times if you open all the doors and move air through, that will keep them from freezing. You can apply the heat tape, but you got to have electricity, and that's probably going to mean in the winter, that's not going to come from solar. And if you're in that kind of cold, you're pretty far north, so the solar is just not going to work. It's just my answer is give up on keeping your pipes running. I did. I don't have a valid answer. Now, some of your 4-season RVs will run them all up, and then you can open the doors and you can move air through. You could do that and try that. I don't think it's a viable. I don't think it's viable. It wasn't for me. I kept the van warm at 30 below 1,000 times easier than I never kept the trailer warm at 30 below. That thing had such crap insulation. See, I started with a box fan, and I put in my own insulation. I put in my own heat, and I did a good job. Well, you're not going to buy an RV that's done a good job. You're going to buy an RV that's done a crap job, so you're not going to have an adequate amount of insulation, and the heat's just going to run constantly. At 30 below, the heat, if I was dependent on the heater, it would just run constantly. Okay, stop talking, Bob. Okay. Hi, Gail. Hi, Bob. Gail, this is from Gail. What was the safest way to keep your car warm for those needing to sleep in their cars in the Pacific Northwest? Again, I don't have a good answer for you. In your car, the problem with your car is you don't have the clearances for a heater. You just don't have the clearances for the heater. If you turn on any kind of a heater, it usually has to be like 2 feet from the nearest flammable surface. And most cars you can't put a heater anywhere in there 2 feet away. And you can't, and that is not something you play games with. I've had heaters in my, one time my dog accidentally knocked off a pillow off a bed, and it got too close to the heater, which was on the floor, and it burst into flame. And so you got to keep those clearances around heater. And I don't know how you're going to do it in a car. You could have it on and run it for a while, and then turn it off, and then physically watch the items near to it that they're not overheating. Don't ever think about running a heater overnight in a car. I've never run a heater overnight in a van other than in Alaska, and that was only with Olympian catalytics. I would not run anything else unless you put it in an RV heater. They're designed to go overnight. There is no good answer. I think you have to keep yourself warm. I have heard people say that candles, and candle in the van is ridiculous. You can't get enough candles. You lined every square inch of it with candles. You couldn't keep it warm. But I think with a car, perhaps you could raise the temperature 5 or 10 degrees with a couple of good candles. There make some candle heaters that work. I would try that. Start the car every so often. Start the car before you go to bed. It's not hard to sleep warm if you know how. It's not hard to sleep warm at all. I've slept outside at 30 below, and it's no fun, but you can do it, and you can sleep if you know how. So the main thing with the Pacific Northwest, though, where you are, is the dreariness and the humidity, because you're not going to have solar, so you're not going to run electricity. My first option would be an electric blanket, either 12 volt or preferably 110. But you're going to have to run a generator to do that, because you're not going to run it off solar in the Pacific Northwest. If you're not in the Pacific Northwest, where maybe you get some sun, it doesn't rain just constantly, then the answer is keep you warm with a 12 volt blanket or of either or a 110 electric blanket. That's really the best thing.
Recommend a carbon monoxide alarm if people run their vehicle or burn candles. Please.
Yeah, yes. If you're having any kind of heat source other than electric in your vehicle, you must have a carbon monoxide detector. You must leave. I would leave a minimum of 2 windows open, so you got some cross ventilation. A minimum of 1 inch down, so both front windows open 1 inch, and you can get cross ventilation. You gotta have ventilation. That's one thing you do not play with. Clearances and ventilation and a carbon monoxide detector. And spend the most money you can on a carbon monoxide detector, just like your life depended on it, because it might. And so, go to an RV store and buy an RV's carbon monoxide detector. They're designed for mobile living. They're designed to be in cold places, to be shaken around and vibrated. And your house carbon monoxide detector at Walmart that's $30-$40 is not designed for any of that. And then once you put it in that environment, I wouldn't trust it. I'd go to an RV store or RV catalog and buy a quality RV detector. Dorothy Huffman, what emergency supplies do you recommend in case we get caught in bad weather unexpectedly? Some for inside and basics for the van itself. Well, you should always have enough food and water to get by on. You should have enough clothing that even without heat, you'll be okay. You don't have to be completely comfortable, but you're going to be okay. So everything I just described is what's always in my van. I always have food and water enough for a week or two. I always, I have enough winter clothes. I spent my whole life in Alaska, and I go nuts with winter clothing. My van is full of winter. I could. It's a compulsion. In fact, at one time I used to carry bunny boots. If you know what bunny boots are, they're the standard what you wear in Alaska if it's really, really cold. And you don't need to carry bunny boots in the lower 48 unless you spend a lot of time outside, and I didn't. So you should have enough warm weather clothing, enough blankets, enough sleeping bags that you can sleep comfortably in the van all the time. And a severe storm is just another week as far as you're concerned. That's the way I treat all emergencies. I'm ready. I live ready. It's in my van. It's in my home. What is that? Water, some food, a way to cook. You must have a stove and some propane. Have an extra bottle or two of propane to get you through a storm. Just in case maybe you just run out right then. Well, if you have an extra bottle or two, a little green bottles, and I always keep 1 or 2 extras on board. Have enough blankets, sleeping bags, clothing. Just be ready. Just always be ready. Joy Route, share with your audience the secret to staying warm in a van without using propane. You guys are asking the impossible, okay? Well, I can give you one answer. You can use an alcohol stove, but you'll end up spending more. But you can stay warm inside your van with alcohol stoves. They make them specifically for boats. And so that's on a piece of wood floating in the ocean doing this. And so they're designed for our environment. And so you can buy an alcohol stove that will, a burnt heater that will keep you warm and comfortable. You're going to spend a whole lot more for alcohol than you will for propane. Propane, as far as I'm concerned, is much, much safer, but that's what the alcohol stoves are designed for. You can do that. Electric, that's your next thing. If you can work up a way to have the power in the winter when the sun is marginally above the horizon, then 12 volt is by far really the best thing. Have a 12 volt heating pad that you can lay on top of you, or you can sleep underneath, or one of each, one on top, one on the bottom. You can't run them for very long unless you have a pretty big power supply. If you have a generator, you're golden. If you're out boondocking and you can set out a generator, then you're set. That's really the way to go, is electric. You're heating your own body and nothing else. Insulation, extra insulation. That's one reason I recommend cargo vans. And if you're in a cold place, insulate the crap out of that thing. The money you spend initially will cover it. Candles, if you've got enough insulation, a few candle heaters will make a difference if you've got enough insulation. And so that's a one-time cost that will pay you dividends forever, as long as you are in the van. Someone just recognized me. Hi.
That's who I thought it was.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. Actually, I'm doing a live feed right now. You can watch. Now what's it do? Yeah, I'm doing a live feed right now. What in the world is going on? I'll probably get a copyright strike for this. Go away. What is happening? What am I touching that's going on? This has never happened before. Why is it happening now? It's in my lap. I better not have it. Oh, and the keyboard is turned around. Okay, that's probably the problem. Okay, what was the question? How to stay warm without propane? And dress, then you just, if you can't do interior heating, then you have to do just heating your own body. And you can build kind of, and then, then you just keep yourself warm. Down booties is my number one recommendation. Your feet are number one. Lots of blankets that you drape around you, layers that you keep on your body. And yeah, that's about it. So what's the next question, Sue-Ann? That's why it's coming on. It's because the keyboard was turned over.
Sure. Karen McDowell asks or says, I'm SUV city living, my own choice. I still work full time until I find an affordable cargo van. Is a small heater like the one you use. I can't remember the name. Olympia, maybe? Okay, for an SUV, I purchased a small buddy heater. What are your thoughts? Should I be concerned about condensation and mold?
So the question is, she's in a SUV. Did she say small SUV or just SUV?
She just says SUVs, and she's in the city. So she's still camping by choice.
Well, to answer her specific questions, yes. She should be very concerned about condensation and mold. They will both happen. It depends on where you are. If you're in the desert Southwest, it's very small issue because it's so dry. You're pumping air in there. Well, if you open it up the next day, and that's the great thing about the desert Southwest is it's usually warm enough the next day. You can open all the doors and it's, and let the heat in. If you're in a cold place, the next day you're not going to open up all the doors because it's going to, and so all the condensation, the moisture never gets out. And of course the east is all very, very humid anyway. And so in the desert Southwest, it's not really an issue. Just open up everything the next day and it'll dry right out. I've not had a problem with it in the desert Southwest in the winter. You live in the Northwest or anywhere on the East Coast, then you're going to have a big, big problem. And I don't have an answer. I don't think there is a good answer. Do you know of any good answers, Sue-Ann? There just aren't.
I don't know of any good answers, no.
If you're running heat in your rig of burning propane, you're pumping moisture in. And the only way to prevent condensation, mold, mildew, is to open it up and air it out completely the next day. And if you're in Seattle and it's raining all day, every day, how you can do that? And it's cold. It's 40 degrees the next day. You can open the whole rig up and pouring rain, and you can open the rig up and just leave it open all day. You're just not gonna. Well, in the desert, you almost always can and do, because it gets warm enough the next day. You can and will. So it's all dependent where you are. And again, I don't have any good answers to this one. If you're in a place where mold and mildew, humidity is a problem and it's really cold, I don't have a good answer. I'm sorry, I just don't. What's this? Oh, I think I can do it now.
Okay.
I just moved the keyboard. I think I was getting the keyboard. Go back. Card one. Share with us your staying warm in the van. Okay,
So
Sheila. How late do you stay up north before you begin moving south? I do have a home base here in the south, and I want to know what's the latest I should stay before coming back home. Well, we're snowbirds, and you stay north until you get uncomfortable, and then you go south. and you leave yourself the room to have the distance to get south. So if it starts getting cold and I'm really uncomfortable, I go south. That really all there is to it, and that will be completely different depending on where you are, and the humidity, and the particular year. Some years it can vary by a month when the cold weather comes in or the snowstorms come in. Look at Colorado; they just got in a huge snowstorm like 2 weeks ago, and then it turned warm and pleasant again. And so when would you go south? It's your comfort zone. Stay north until you're uncomfortable and then go south. Or you can see the storm coming and you want to outrun it. That's a key thing, because you'll usually give them some warning. Snowstorm's coming, head south now, or wait till afterwards and go south in the snow. You just have to play it by ear. It's always determined by that specific time and that specific place. So I can't give you a generalization, just until you get uncomfortable. Be comfortable. That's the goal. None, no. What are your thoughts on the cheap 12-volt diesel parking heaters? I've had two and love them. Currently living the Prius life in Alaska. Yeah, they're inexpensive. You don't really have anything to lose. There's some really, for the audience, let me explain. There's some really high quality diesel heaters, and they initially came out, I think, primarily for rigs like the Volkswagen, which had the Eurovan had a diesel in it, or for the big trucks, because they're of all diesel. So you tap into your tank on board and you burn diesel. And these are like $1,000 and more, the good quality ones. I can't remember the names of them. But they were so expensive, and they're actual furnaces. So they are vented to the outside. None of the exhaust goes inside. So they're inherently safer. Let's face it, that's inherently safer. All the humidity, the moisture, is going outside and not in the rig. That's, like we just talked about, that's far, far better. And then they're ducted, so the air moves around evenly through the rig. And they got great thermostats. They're fantastic. To a lot of people, they're worth $1,000. Well, for a lot of people, just can't afford $1,000. So in China, they've made clones, and they're clones of these heaters, and you can buy them from, I think you can get them, I know you can get them on eBay, but I think you could get them on Amazon, and they're a couple $100. And the installation's not the simplest thing, but if you're a handyman, you'll figure it out and get it installed. And you'll have to do some cutting. You're going to have to cut a vent in and out, and you're going to have to run the ducting, and you have to provide power, and you're going to have to tap into your gas tank or provide your own diesel. They're cheap to operate because they're running on diesel, and people buy them and love them. And so there you go. If those are the advantages and disadvantages, they're vented outside. The exhaust is what takes the moisture and the carbon monoxide outside. As long as you don't block that vent, you're safer. You're really safe. They do burn electricity because they got a fan. I don't think it's too bad, but they do burn. I don't know how much. I honestly don't. I don't know much about them other than what I've just told you. I would never bother with it. But for a lot of you, first off, I wouldn't do the installation. I'd have to hire someone. Who are you going to get to hire? Or can you do it yourself? If you can do it yourself, it's kind of a no-brainer. $200 and you do the install, and it's not very hard. Well, it is kind of hard, but you can do it, and then you're done. So, but if you pay the $200 and hire someone, then you might be into a pretty big bucks. Should you do it? I don't know. It's up to you and your situation. How much money do you have? And yeah, I don't know. Okay, Angela R., please touch on staying warm in a van and what type of ventilation is needed. Well, and that's what we've been talking about, different methods of staying warm. First, insulate. That's number one. If you can insulate heavily, it takes a minimum amount of heat to keep it warm. So that's number one. If you want to live in a van in a cold place, insulate. Everybody's always after the latest and greatest thing. You're not going to beat bang for the buck, amount of R value, amount of ease of installation. You're not going to beat polyiso sheets. You're just not going to beat it. It's R7 per inch. Easy to install. A screw gun will just screw right them into the walls and the ribs, and it's fantastic. It's easy to install, easy to work with. I think they're going to be like $20 or $30 for a 4x8 sheet, and you'll need, how many will you need? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe six sheets. $120, $150. It's really cheap and easy installation. So all you need is a screw gun, and you can do it. So that's really what I recommend, more than anything else, insulation. And then you need some kind of a heat source, and it doesn't have to be great. You could try, what I do, and if you've watched, you know, I just use my Coleman one burner stove, and I run it for half an hour, and the van warms up because I've insulated, and the van warms up, and I turn it off, and it cools down, and when it gets a little cooler than I like, I turn it on again. So I might run that an hour, 2 a night, broken up over a period of time. Extreme colds, I might run it more. But that works fine for me, really fine. After that, my next recommendation is Olympian heater. They're true catalytics. They're safer, much safer. Everything we're talking about, you have to have ventilation. If you drop your 2 front windows 1 inch, that's almost always going to be enough, unless you're really pumping in some heat that I'm not aware of. And of course, most of you are probably going to buy Mr. Buddies, and they're fine too. They're great heaters. I'm not saying a bad word about Mr. Buddies. I'm going to tell you, I firmly believe that the Olympian is better and worth buying, but they are a little more expensive, and they're a little more complicated to install because they are low pressure instead of green bottles. So you could buy a Mr. Buddy heater, and if you insulate well and you run a Mr. Buddy, you can run your Mr. Buddy heater for 15 minutes and bake the van if it's well insulated. Turn it off for an hour, hour and a half, 2, whatever, depends on the outside temperature. Then run it for another 15 minutes, and that will do you the whole night, and it won't even cost you much. And it's not very risky, because if you run it, never run them at night. Never run them at night. Always have ventilation. Always have a carbon monoxide detector. Don't buy the cheap one at Walmart. Go to an RV store and buy a quality detector designed for RVs. Your life depends on it. Spend the money. It'll be $150. Spend the money. Yeah, you just need to provide, the more insulation, the less heat you have, the less risk you have, the less it costs. It's just, the insulation is the key to staying warm in the winter.
And fire extinguishers.
Yeah, and the fire extinguishers are a really good idea too. Yeah. Okay, card 2. Well, we're doing okay. Brian Mahoney, best way to heat van with Wave 3 without condensation problems. What about diesel while in cold temps? You're not going to get around, the only way to get around condensation problems. Again, condensation problems aren't a big issue. I have never had a real issue with condensation in the desert Southwest. It's dry enough, the next day you open the van up, it airs out. But everywhere else, you will just simply going to have condensation problems. There is no solution to get around the condensation problems. You're pumping heat into the van. You're pumping moisture into the van with that heat, and you're not airing it out the next day. If you're in a cold area, that's what's going to happen. And so, no, there isn't an answer for it. I don't have one. It's just going to have condensation. And if you have an answer, leave it in the comments, because I'd love to know. I don't know what it is. I never found one. I don't think diesel congeals until very cold temperatures, and I don't know about the Chinese knockoff diesel heaters. I wouldn't think they'd have a problem starting. I'm not aware. I don't know of a problem with running. There's lots of problems with running your diesel engine in the winter, but that's not the topic, so we're not going to cover it. I don't think there's a problem with diesel in the winter if you have a diesel heater. I don't know. I've never done it, so I don't know. Van state of mind. How would you suggest getting rid of moisture out of the air while using a propane heater? Have you tried using damp rid? I have. It did nothing. You're pumping moisture into the air. Damper is not going to do it. It didn't do it for me. Could you do a dehumidifier in a van, in a car, SUV? No, I mean, that's just not a practical solution. I don't have an answer to condensation. It's a problem. Move to the desert Southwest. That's my answer to you. Be in there, run a little bit of heat overnight, not much because it doesn't get all that cold. I mean, below freezing is not normal in the desert Southwest. And the next day, the sun will come up, it will cool off. Now, not always. There's storms. We get storms blow through the desert Southwest. We have rainy days where it gets cloudy and kind of damp and rainy for 2, 3, 4 days at a time. But then it's done, and the sun will shine, and you'll open up, and you'll dry it out. So that does happen in the desert Southwest. But it's not part of your life. It's not something you build your life around at all. Yeah, there's no answer for moisture in the van. Go to the desert Southwest. That's my answer. Tara Roberts, can you use butane stove for heat in a minivan? Yes, if you can afford it. Yeah, absolutely. Those little tiny 8-ounce bottles, man, how fast would they burn up in a van? I don't know, but you'd spend an awful lot of money, and you'd have been a lot better off with butane. I don't think you're going to get less moisture. It's still BTUs burned puts moisture out. That's all there is to it. And so, no, you're not going to save anything in moisture. And of course, butane doesn't work below freezing, but the idea is that you're running the butane so it doesn't get below freezing. But you can't buy it in bulk. See, with propane, you convert to a bulk bottle, and you're paying $3 a gallon. And you're paying, with butane, you're paying $1.50, $2 more for an 8-ounce bottle. So for the cost of 2 8-ounce bottles, you could have bought a gallon of propane, and that's a lot of fuel. And I don't know how you could have possibly afford to run butane for heat. But if you found a way, then good. Let me know how you're doing it. I'd like to know. It's just, if you can afford it, go for it. Lovely Blue One. Hey Bob, I am from Ontario, Canada, and our winters get below 40 times. Do you think I should just bite the bullet and invest in an S-Bar D2 heater when starting my van life? I don't know what that is. I'm going to assume it's a good quality diesel heater furnace. If you can afford it, yeah, if you're going to be in extreme cold, nothing will beat one of those a good quality diesel furnace. No, absolutely no question about it. You're not pumping the moisture in. Boy, that alone is going to be worth it. Is just to vent out exhausting out the moisture and the carbon monoxide. That's enormous. Now, if you have the money and the skill or money to pay to have it installed, then yeah, I think you'll be glad you did. If I lived in Alaska again, would I do it? If you said you're going to live in Alaska this year in a van, no, I wouldn't buy one. I'd just buy another Olympian. I'd do exactly what I did in the past. I was completely happy with those. But it will certainly work, and a lot of advantages. When I lived in Alaska, and we'd get a cold snap, and it was 30 below Fahrenheit. When it was 30 below Fahrenheit, after it broke, so it would be 2-3 weeks at 30 below, and as soon as the warm moist air, which is what was in the van because I was running heater 24-hour a day, the warm air would go up and hit the van roof and freeze solid. And so the whole roof I wouldn't see it because there's insulation. I couldn't see the roof, but I'm sure the whole roof was like an inch thick of frost. Well, when the cold snap broke and it warmed up to 20s again, Anchorage is usually in the 20s in the winter. The highs during the most winter days are in the 20s, maybe the high teens, but high teens, low 20s. That's really typical for Anchorage. It's not all that cold a place. It's on the water. It's a port. And then I'd be running heat inside, and all that frost, and I never saw it because I couldn't see the roof, but there was a lot of frost up there. And then when I warmed up the van, it all melted, and my van would literally rain. It would literally rain until all that moisture came down, found a low spot, and rained in. I would have buckets. After a cold snap, I'd have buckets set out to catch all the water. And So yeah, that was not good. But no, very few of you are going to be in that kind of extreme colds. Um, so yeah, moisture is a big problem, and any kind of a vented furnace will solve that. Kathy Reese, are there heaters for nylon tents? I don't know. Just a small unit to run upon awakening, not all night. Thanks. Well, I would think you could run the smallest. Yeah, I think you can run the Mr. Buddies inside tents. They're designed for indoor use. The key thing is just to follow the instructions manual on the heater. If it says it's safe to use indoor, then go ahead and use it indoor. And if it says it isn't safe to use indoor, then don't use it. You're at risk. So really, the important thing is I would go to, if you're interested in the smallest diesel, the smallest Mr. Buddy. Their naming system is weird for me. The big one is the Big Buddy. The middle one is the Mr. Buddy, and maybe the next smallest one is Small Buddy. I'm not Little Buddy. It probably is Little Buddy. But you can't. It's hard to convert those to bulk, so you have to buy green and run green bottles, and that's expensive. One of those green bottles will run a Little Buddy for 5 hours, maybe 6 hours. So that's going to be a lot of propane. Use one of those every night, and they're $3.50 at Walmart, so that's going to get expensive. Now, what I would more likely do is just run it for 15 minutes. Get up, get out of bed in the morning, run it for 15 minutes, get back in bed. It's so it's warm when you get dressed. That's the only thing I know of that would be worth usable. And just go to Mr. Buddy's website, Mr. Heater, Mr. Buddy, Mr. Heater Buddy Heater. I think that's their official name. And then download the PDF of the manual and see if it's safe intent. It should say inside there. If it's safe intent, then use it. If it's not safe intent, then don't use it. Again, everyone should always have a carbon monoxide deck detector, plenty of ventilation. You should have windows or doors open in your tent, in whatever you're in your car, your van, your SUV, and you should have a fire extinguisher right there. Always, at all times. CTV. Bob, what's your favorite winter temperature to camp in? 55. That's my favorite winter temperature to camp in. I don't like cold. I'm done with cold. When I left Alaska, I was done with cold. In fact, I wish the desert didn't get as cold as it did. I'd be very happy if it didn't. The only way to get warmer than the Arizona desert where I go is to go south into Mexico or all the way south into South Florida. And I don't want to go to either of those places. So I'm going to the Arizona area, Quartzsite area, along the Colorado River, and put up a little bit cold. No, I'm done with cold. I don't want to camp in winter camping ever again, ever. No snow for Bob. And Hammond. I have no heat in my van, but I'm always cozy warm using a 12-volt electric blanket. Uses 70 watts. Easily works with my 200 watts of solar and 250 amp hour batteries. Yes, absolutely. I'm agreeing 100% with you, Ann. Very wise. Yeah, your a 12-volt blanket, they make them as pads that you sleep on. You turn one on, and they almost always have timers, and you'll want a timer. You don't want to depend on it to stay warm overnight. You want to have enough blankets and sleeping bags or whatever you're using, quilts, to stay warm overnight. But boy, getting in a warm bed with a 12-volt pad under it, man, that's good stuff. And another great thing is to turn on your stove inside. I run my stove inside all the time, and warm up some hot water and put it in a hot water bottle and put it in there beforehand. You've heated the van or car or SUV by running the hot water, getting the hot water ready. You put more moisture in the air, and then you put it in the hot water and you put it in there and you sleep with it. And that's double warmth. That's very good. But yes, the 110 volt, if you have enough electricity, or the 12 volt heating pads or blankets. You can buy them as blankets that go on top of you. And get one with a thermostat and a timer, so you can set it to go off. Yeah, they work really well, and they're one of my top. The big thing is when you're just laying in the winter, it gets dark by 5, no later than 6, everywhere in the United States. And so you have from 6 to bedtime 10, 11 o'clock for most of us, later. Some of us are night owls. And what are you going to do from 6 to 10 in the dark? We're going to turn the light on and you're going to sit on your bed and you're going to watch TV, or you're going to watch YouTube, or you're going to read, or you're going to do something, but you don't want to be in there cold. So you wrap a 12-volt blanket over you and then a blanket on top of that, and you be toasty warm all night. And your hands will get cold, put them in there by that 12-volt, and yeah, that's a really, really good way to go. That's actually the best way to go, just more solar. And if you're in the desert, you'll get enough solar. Ann says she gets enough with 200 watts and 250 amp hours of battery. So if you have a little more, I would recommend more. More is always better. You're running your fridge because the winter is so low on solar. You got short days and low on the horizon. Bad combination. And then every so often you'll get a storm come in. So I would run, she says you can do it on 200 watts. I personally would do a little more if you can. Mark Combs, greetings, Bobs. What are your thoughts about winter tent camping with a wood stove? Great stuff. 2 thumbs up. Winter camping with a wood stove. I'm looking to get a good canvas tent and wood stove to use as my main living area, with my trunk camper shell as my other realm of shelter. I know you're not a fan of tents due to the exposure winds, but good canvas is durable and relatively quiet in wind. Well, it depends on where you're going to spend your time, Mark. If you're going to be in the forest, see, the forest, the wind does blow in the forest. I know that. It's nothing compared to the desert. So if you're going to be in the north in a true cold country, wind won't be an issue. A canvas tent with a wood stove is a great, great way to go. In the desert, the problem isn't so much keeping it standing. They'll stand. It's the flapping and the cold. And if you got a wood stove, it would take much to keep one of those warm at all. And you get no moisture. That's another fantastic thing about burning with heat. With wood is it actually takes moisture out of the air because it doesn't put the moisture in. It all goes up the chimney. Big fan of canvas tents. And yes, I would do one in the desert. I definitely would. I would promote really hard a teepee style tent, because they will shed the wind so much better. You'll have less flapping. It's the flapping more than anything else. A good canvas tent should stand up to any wind if it's good quality. But it's the flapping that really, it's hard to sleep in there with their flapping. But so a teepee style would be my first choice. And you can get some good, they're expensive. You're spending some money, but that would really be what I would recommend. But even like one of the Kodiaks or Spring, what's the other one? Does anyone remember? Spring Bar. They're great. I actually prefer Spring Bar a little over the Kodiak, but they're both great. They're 2 great choices. One may be slightly better than the other, but they're very, very good choices. Okay. Yeah, and then having the truck camper shell, if it is a really bad wind and you just can't sleep, you could go and sleep in the shell. And that wouldn't happen very often. So yeah, in the desert or in the forest. But that's a very good plan. I think that's one everyone should give some thought to. It's kind of expensive and it takes up a lot of room. Those big canvas tents are big and heavy, slow to set up, slow to take down. But boy, once you're done, you've got a nice home. Sharon Woodward, watching the insulation vid of your van, I cannot tell if there is a gap space between the polyiso so that you glued to the metal walls and the next layer of polyiso screwed to the ribs. Is there an air gap between the poly layers, or do you glue more layers until it's even with the ribs? I think in my case, the polyiso was the exact same width as the ribs, so there was no air gap. So and the reason I glued it directly to the steel of the van between the ribs is because I hope that is going to eliminate mold. Because mold happens when warm moisture hits a cold surface, which the skin of your van is always going to be a cold surface, and then it drops its moisture as condensation. So that's always going to happen. My thinking there was, and if there's an air gap between the skin and the insulation, and if there's any way the air can get through that, then it's going to drop its moisture and you're going to get mold behind the insulation. Then you're depending on a vapor barrier. And man, it is really hard to put up a vapor barrier that's really, truly water air tight, really hard. No brakes, no way for air to get in there. And if air gets in there and there's a gap, that warm, moist air will hit this cold metal skin and will drop its moisture. And yet then the vapor barrier will hold it in there, that moisture in there against the skin. And so my thinking was, by having, if this is the skin and the insulation was right up against it, glued on it, curved to it, get a thin enough one that will curve to it and conform to it. So, well, I can't make my fingers go that far. Then the air can't ever get to the skin to hit the cold skin and drop their moisture. They'll only drop their moisture on the insulation, and the insulation should be warm. So you don't want an air gap, because that's where the air was going to come in from. That was my thinking. I didn't have that long enough. Oh no, it's this fan. And I'd have to tear off the insulation and see if there's mold underneath it. And I'm not going to do that. I don't think there is. I think that's sound thinking. That better than an air gap is to have the insulation directly up against the skin, so the warm, moist air can never hit it. That was my thinking. I hope it works. And so no, in my case, I didn't have an air gap. I think it was, I bought 1 inch, if I don't remember, it's been 3 years. I think I bought 1 inch insulation, and that fit perfectly behind between the ribs, and so there wasn't an air gap. But if there was an air gap, I wouldn't be too concerned about it, because that insulation shouldn't be cold and shouldn't cause condensation. I'm hoping, and I don't know. Sharon Woodward, watching. Oh, you were the one I just answered. So next card 3. Lori Taylor, 1 minute. Hello, have you ever tried damp rid for moisture? What is your opinion on this? Didn't work for me at all. You're just pumping so much moisture out there. That thing is not going to get it out of the air. It's kind of a hopeless task. Sherry Capito, I've heard that Mylar blankets can be put up on walls as well for body for warmth. Yes, you can put up a Mylar blanket, and if you put up Reflectix, that's a Mylar blanket. It's just reflective. They're both reflective services. They're reflective insulation, and so yes, you can put one up. It's the same thing. If the warm, moist air gets behind it and hits, and it will, I'm not a believer in absolute vapor barriers. The very moist air gets behind it, hits that skin, it will drop its moisture. That's what condensation is. You can't make it stop. And it will condense, and you'll have moisture behind there, and you're going to have mold. Mold on the skin of the van is going to, moisture on the skin of the van is going to cause mold, period. If it stays there, and it will. So my recommendation is put in insulation and then glue them. I'd use Reflectix, because it's going to be more sturdy and has a tiny bit of insulation value. And this is just as reflective as Mylar. Although you could use Mylar, it's up to you. Space blanket, I'd use a space blanket. It's more durable. And you glued it directly on, so there's no air gap. So the air can't get behind there. Then you're fine. And I would do that. Yeah, I would do that. I wouldn't leave an air gap behind the Mylar, though. I think you're begging for mold. Dance Waves. Would a diesel heater, wood stove, and a Coleman 1 burner stove be enough for below freezing temps and snow on a van? Well, like I said, all 3 of them, I would choose one of them, a Coleman 1 burner stove. Coleman 1 burner stove probably won't be enough. You can't get enough heat out of it, and I wouldn't run it all the time. What else? What are your options? Wood stove. Out of your 3 options, the wood stove is your best if you have the room, because there again, you got to have the clearances. Clearances are life and death. If you don't give your stoves, your heat source, adequate clearances, you will die. I've had a van I've had it catch on fire in my van. I could have died. Well, I was in there and I put it right out. But yeah, clearances are absolutely critical. Things will burst into fire. If you can give yourself the clearances, ventilation, you must have adequate ventilation. Follow the manufacturer's recommendation. And a carbon monoxide detector and fire extinguisher. You must have those 4 things if you're going to have run a heat source inside your van. So, assuming you do that, wood stove would be my first choice. You're not putting moisture in. It's just ideal, and it's just ideal. It's cheaper. A wood stove is going to be a whole lot cheaper if you pay someone to install a diesel heater, I think. And a Coleman 1 burner is not going to work in extreme cold. Just won't. But again, above everything else, good insulation. The more insulation, the less fuel you have to burn, whatever kind of fuel, to keep the warm in. Keep the heat in first and foremost. That's number 1. Then any minor source of heat would keep it warm. So if you put enough insulation in, one of the little Mr. Buddies, you'll run that for 15 minutes. It will get baking hot, then you'll turn it off. And that's really all you need. And in 15 minutes, you're not going to get a whole lot of moisture put in there. You're going to get moisture. Burning propane puts moisture in the air. It's just that simple. But the insulation minimizes how much you're going to run. Of course, the diesel heater doesn't have any moisture, neither does the wood stove. The Coleman one does. Oh, I can't turn this thing off. I'm having all kinds of hard times. What time is it? It's just about time to be done. Let's go a little more. MJ, a newbie, what's the biggest things to consider for my first winter? No shore power or solar yet. Well, you don't give me enough information. You're not, what rig are you in? Have you insulated it? My first recommendation is insulation. I hope I'm communicating that. Keep the heat in. Now, maybe you can insulate it. Maybe you're in a minivan and you're not going to rip everything off and insulate it, and that's a lot of work. And I understand that. So if you can't insulate it, then go for keeping your body warm. Go with, learn how to layer to stay warm so that you don't sweat and have body moisture, and that just keeps you really cold. So that's the point of layering. You would keep adjusting your layers till you don't sweat, you don't have moisture inside. Moisture is a real killer in the cold. Your first winter, and what's my recommendation? Mr. Buddy heater. Insulate first. That's not practical. A Mr. Buddy heater. And what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up running it 15 minutes, 20 minutes, the van will get really warm. Just turn it off. You'll be doing that all the time. And it works. Assuming, again, you have a vehicle where you can have the clearances you need. You always give it the ventilation. You have a carbon monoxide detector and a fire extinguisher right there. Clothing, your first biggest thing to consider, insulation and clothing. Keep yourself warm. Bedding, so you sleep warm at night and you don't need heat. Don't try and keep heat going overnight. Elio Mara, W, what are your thoughts on having WeRoll insulate floor of one of their trailers with that poly insulation you described, and feasibility of radiant heat in aluminum floor of a WeRoll trailer? I do not insulate the floors of my rigs. I never have. I know that's controversial. A bunch of you will write in and say that's crazy. I've lived in Alaska for 40 years. And the conclusions I've reached that in a van, it's not worth the effort. You're going to have a cold floor. Don't put your feet on the floor. It's not that hard. Keep your feet above the floor. Where for $30, $40, go to Amazon and buy a Baffin. That's the name, Baffin. It's named after Baffin Island, the really cold island in Canada. These are made in Canada. Buy Baffin down insulated booties. They will keep your feet warm. Keep your feet warm. Don't try and keep the floor warm. Here's what's going to happen. You need to understand this. If you're running a source of heat, everyone needs to understand this. All the heat's going to rise, and it's going to be 100 degrees at your roof. And your floor is going to be the outside temperature. Did you hear me say that? I'll say it again. It's going to be 100 degrees. You're running a heater. It's going to be 100 degrees at the roof, and the floor, no matter what you do, is going to be outside temperature. So why fight to warm the floor, warm your feet, and keep your feet elevated? So just wear a pair of these Baffin boots, and your feet will always be warm. And then when you set, get your feet elevated, which is more comfortable anyway, and so they're not down on the floor. And then you just eliminate that whole issue. Then your question is about hydroflooring, putting hot water heat through the flooring that radiates out. Man, that's a lot of money. If you have that kind of money to spend, then go for it. It's ideal. I think I'd rather have a wood stove, but it depends on the size of the rig, and there's lots of variables, and I don't know what's best for you. Yeah, I wouldn't do that. I think I'd put in a diesel heater before I would put in hydronic heating. Yeah, that's just so much work. And my overriding philosophy and everything I'm ever going to tell you is keep it really simple and cheap and minimize problems in the future. And putting in radiant heating in the floor is the exact opposite of my basic principles of living. And I think unless you have a whole bunch of money, my principles work, and that's what I recommend for you. Keep it really simple. Do it the easiest, simplest way. Keep it in mind in the future so that when it breaks, and it will break, it's going to be the absolute minimum risk and cost to you. Non-complex. Non-complexity is just everything, and choosing the most god-awful complex thing you could possibly choose, that just doesn't make sense to me, and I don't recommend it. But I know people do it and love it. And if you can afford it, and you can afford the maintenance in the future, nothing's better than a hot water radiant heater in the floor. Okay, Hope, where's the safest place to RV with snow, not including Arizona? Well, what do you mean? What are the risks? Why are you worried about safety? What's the danger? Well, at any ski resort town, they're going to keep the roads open. And they have everything set up for the cold. Anywhere where there's ski resorts. I don't really understand the question. Safest. If you're equipped for snow camping, what difference does it make if it's in Arizona or in Montana or West Yellowstone, Montana? West Yellowstone, Montana is one of the coldest places in the country. What difference does it make? I would say if you really enjoy snow camping, I'd go to a ski town. They're equipped for get 10 feet of snow to get it out of the way and get emergency vehicles moving around and to be cut off from the road and have plenty of supplies on hand. That's what that's kind of part of their planning. That's what I would do. It doesn't even matter where. Any ones in Utah or Wyoming or Montana, anywhere there's a ski resort or Maine. That's still where I'd go. They're equipped for 10 feet of snow coming in all at once. And then that's the safest place you could be. 5D, I thought I once saw a video you did on snowbirds and it meant that you head for warm climates when snow is coming your way. Why struggle through snowstorms and jeopardize weathering your rig? No, absolutely. Again, number one, be a snowbird and get out of the cold. But I know a lot of you can't. I lived in Alaska for 6 years. I had no choice. My kids lived there, and I was not driving away from my kids. So until they grew up and became independent, I was living in Anchorage, Alaska, so I had to camp in the cold. So yes, absolutely. If at all possible, go to Arizona. Arizona is just a perfect place to spend the winter. There's a ton of us. You can meet people. The weather is mostly good. It does get kind of cold. It does rain. We get some dreary days. But, where there are the most days of sunshine anywhere in the United States of America? Yuma, Arizona. They have over 300 days of sunshine a year. That's a good place to live. They'd also have a lot of wind. But Quartzsite has 280, 290. Thumbs up. I like sunshine. I like warmth. So my answer to everyone is go to Arizona. But some of you can't, and we're trying to help you. We're back to winterizing. What's an easy way to winterize my Class B? I'll be living in it full time over the winter and trying to avoid any pipes breaking. I don't have any good answers. If you have a source of heat, then you wrap the pipes with electric tape, heat tape. It's a tape that's wide and flat. You wrap it, and it has you plug it in, and it provides a constant source heat. That's number one. Number two is then you use a insulation that's designed. You use heat tapes designed to have insulation over it. You usually buy them together. It's the same brand. They're meant to go together. And then you wrap insulation, usually fiberglass strips around it. That's the best thing you can do. Otherwise, you'll have to open up all the doors, hopefully, that the manufacturer, if the manufacturer hasn't done all this for you, it's probably too late. You cannot do it. But hopefully the manufacturer has put the piping up higher above the floor. You can just open all the drawers and keep air moving down through that. And maybe running a fan, maybe like I said earlier, what I had used once was heat lamps. You know, like they make like 200-watt, 250-watt heat lamps designed for chicks, to keep chicks warm when they're whatever that is they're doing to them. I forget the word. And so that's a good way to go. You can put one of those down there, shoot it in. You can watch your clearances, because you can char your wood and make it susceptible to burst into flame. Clearances are everything. Okay, reminder again: 4 absolute critical things in the winter if you are running any kind of a heat source in your home, wherever you live in. Casey, make sure I remember all these. 1 is have a carbon monoxide detector if you're running any kind of burning fuels. Number 2 is have a fire extinguisher. Number 3 is always have ventilation. Have as a minimum amount that the manufacturer asks for, get extra. Have insulation. I lost my train of thought, KC. Clearances. Have plenty of clearances. Ventilation clearances. Have them all. Okay.
You got it. You got them all.
All righty. Jessica Laurie. Okay. I'm curious to know how and where to winter camp when campsites and other locations are closed up for the season and you can't travel south for the winter. I don't have any. In snow country, they don't. Out west, I can speak for out west. National forests don't keep almost any of the roads open. There is virtually no camping in national forests. There are exceptions somewhere. I know there are, but I don't know where they are. They just close them. They don't keep them open. So there goes our main source is national forest, and then you got BLM. But apparently you can't go south to BLM land. That's why we all go south to BLM land. There's no national forest left. I don't have an answer because I've never done it. I stealth parked. That's what I did. I had to in Anchorage, Alaska. I stealth parked. This was a long time ago. This was 95 to 2001, and it was easy to stealth park in Anchorage back then. I don't think it is anymore. In the winter, they wouldn't be looking for you though. So, stealth park. That's my only answer. I don't know where else you would do it.
15 after.
Okay, this is the last question. We'll have done 3 cards. Frida Wolden. 3 years ago, you recommended the blue slippers. I bought them and loved them. There you go. See, I told you so. However, the bottoms wore out. I'm curious what slippers you wear now. My feet get cold. Same thing. I've never worn them out. Yeah, I'd just buy another pair. You got 3 years service. What do they cost? $35, $40? $10 a year to keep your feet warm and toasty? Oh man, what a bargain. Buy another pair. Yeah, but they're that good. They are that good. Everyone I ever have known who heard me say go buy these and went and bought them said, wow, you were right. They keep my feet warm. Now they're not really down. That's the key thing. They're down and they're alternative. There's some fake down. Because down your feet sweat, and that's why your feet are always cold. Oh, and this is a little tip. Before you go to bed, your feet will always sweat, and sweat will make your feet cold, and your socks will be damp. And you get into bed with damp socks and wet feet, and you're going to be cold. You're going to have cold feet no matter what. So always keep a pair of bed socks, and I recommend a heavy pair of wool boot socks. And every night before you get in bed, get them out of whatever they've been in, let them air out, wipe them off, massage them a little bit. Those feet work hard, treat them really well, wash them off, get a rag and wash them, and then wipe them and thank them. Be very thankful to your feet. Man, they're astounding servants, aren't they? Imagine where we'd be without our feet. And then put on this clean pair of wool boot socks that you never wear. The only time they're ever touching your skin is in bed. And you'll go to bed and you won't have any problem whatsoever. Well, you might. You can still be really cold and you didn't prepare, but you can still have a problem. But your feet should stay warm. And if you need to, what you can also do is put on a pair of, and it's a really good thing to do, is to put on an inner layer of a thin nylon type sock so that it wicks, a wicking sock, so that your feet will sweat overnight. They always do. Your feet always sweat. And that will wick it away to your feet will stay warm and cool. Your feet will stay dry and therefore warm, and the moisture will be wicked out to the wool. And the beauty of wool is it keeps you warm even when it's a little damp, and it won't even be very damp because there just won't. You're not going to have that much. Okay, I'm done. Thank you all so much. Bubbles. We gotta watch Bubbles. I don't know about these bubbles. What does it say about us that we love bubbles? It says we're fun-loving people, doesn't it? That we're happy, go-lucky, fun-loving people. We need bubbles in our lives. Who isn't better off with some bubbles in your life? That's why we're all out
Try
here.
Bubbles and Bob.
What?
Oh, never mind.
Okay, so thank you all for watching. I hope I get rattling on and I rattle on and on and on. I'm sorry. I try not to be that way. But I hope you learned something. This is all hard-earned knowledge. I've spent a lot of cold nights in a van. I've been a lot of spent cold nights in a sleeping bag outdoors. And so this is hard-earned knowledge, and I hope it's helped. And so if you got anything out of this video, like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye now. Now I turn this off. Looking up my nose again.